So yesterday we did learning target 12, and we graphed the vertical shifts and the phase shifts individually. So learning target 13 puts it all together. So I'm telling you the exact steps you must take in order to do them correctly. So here they are. The first thing you're going to do is figure out the vertical shift and figure out the midline and graph that. That's the first thing you're going to do. After you've done that, you're going to figure out the amplitude and figure out the maximum and the minimum. Then you're going to figure out the period, and you're going to make the scale for your graph. Remember, period's 2 pi over k. That hasn't changed. Then the last thing you're going to do is figure out the phase shift, and then you can make the graph after you've done that. You need to do them in that order so you don't get yourself confused. So yesterday, some of you guys were trying to do on learning target 12 too many things at one time, and you're getting yourself confused. If you do everything in this order, step by step, then you won't be as confused. Okay? Questions? All right. So we're going to graph this equation. Now here's what you need to keep in mind. It's going to be sine or cosine, but a function is going to look like this. All right? A indicates what the amplitude is. K is always in front of the theta, and K helps you find the period and helps you find the phase shift. C is in parentheses, always. Okay? And helps you find the phase shift. And then the vertical shift is always outside of the parentheses. So, for example, if you're given a problem and there aren't any parentheses, well, if there's no parentheses, there can't be a phase shift. So then being added on, then it's just a vertical shift. Okay? So be very careful that you're looking at the right things.
No parentheses, no phase shift.
Correct.
That's a good note.
That is a good note. All right, so we're going to do this in the order I just told you. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out the vertical shift. So what is the vertical shift in this equation? -6. So that means the midline is at y equals -6. Everyone know where that came from?
Yes.
Who said no? Okay, so we're good. So the first thing we're going to graph. So I'm going to go down here and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to put a dashed line in here to show the midline. That's my new horizontal axis. That's like my new x-axis when I'm graphing. We're going to go with step 1. Okay, step 2. We're going to figure out the amplitude, and we're going to figure out the maximum minimum. So what's the amplitude of the function?
4.
All right, so then what is the maximum value going to be and the minimum value?
-2 and -10.
Right, because it's -6 plus 4, -6 minus 4. So -2 is right here, and then 7, 8, 9, 10. So I know that my function is only going to go as high as -2 and as low as -10. Correct?
Yes.
Everyone good? All right, the next thing to do is find the period. The period is 2 pi divided by k. So what is k? 1/2. So 2 pi divided by 1/2 is 4 pi. So based on that, what is the scale that I'm going to count by? Pi, because you just divide by 4, right? So I have pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. We might have to change that a little bit or add on to either end in a second we figure out the phase shift, but for now, that's what we got. Everyone good? For the maximum minimum, we took the midline or the vertical shift, -6, and we found the amplitude, and we added that and subtracted that. So -6 plus 4, -6 minus 4. Yes. Okay. Any questions? Other questions so far? All right. The last thing is the phase shift. So the phase shift is C over K. What is, we already know what K is. We did 5 seconds ago. We used it, 1/2. What is C? The original equation has a minus sign. So what is C?
Negative 5.
Negative pi. So we get negative 2 pi as our phase shift. That means we're going to shift 2 pi to the left. So it's negative. Everyone know where that came from? This is the time to ask. This is the time to ask because we only have one example. All right. So because we're going to shift negative 2 pi, that means normally when we start a graph, we start on the y-axis. Our first point is at x equals 0, right? Well, since I'm shifting it to the left, negative 2 pi, right? Shifting to the left 2 pi, I need to figure out what's going to be on the negative side of the x-axis because I'm going to be shifting it over that direction. So I use the same scale. I'm still counting by pi. So you can't like make up some new scale. But I just go backwards. So I have negative pi and negative 2 pi because I need to shift over that much. This is a cosine function, right? Where does a cosine function start if we weren't shifting everything? It starts at the max, right? So it's still going to start at the max. But instead of putting the point at negative 2, which is our new max, on the y-axis, we're putting a point right here at negative 2 pi, negative 2. Does everyone understand why that point is there? Right, we shifted it, the maximum to actually down to negative 2. It's getting shifted over negative 2 pi. Yeah? Okay, so then where does the next point go? Right, it goes on your new x-axis. Where's your next point go? Right, the minimum. Now, be careful. Some people just get in the habit, don't skip over 0. Like 0 is still part of your scale here. So don't skip it. And then we go back to the midline, right? Then back to the maximum. You only need to show one full period on a quiz, but you could keep going. Like you don't have to stop. It's a wave, right? So you only have to show me this much, but you could keep going if you wanted to, and that would be okay. You don't have to. Any questions about where any of that came from? I used the crayon. I used the electronic crayon. Any questions about where any of that came from? Any at all? Any? Okay. So most of the time they're going to be just like this. It's going to be a shift that's going to be on the scale. Let's say, just for argument's sake, so we can say we've talked about it. Let's say that this had a phase shift. Instead of negative 2 pi, it was negative pi over 2. Okay? Yeah? Negative pi over 2, like pi over 2 is not part of our scale. But it is a half, right? It's a half pi. So negative pi over 2 would be right here, correct? Where I put that red mark. Well, so if it was negative pi over 2, then our graph would start here, obviously. But when you graph, you still have to graph a point every pi. So you're going to end up skipping over what you originally had and graphing it every half increment. Does that make sense? Right, you would skip over 0 and you would go to pi over 2. And then you'd skip over pi and go to 3 pi over 2. Because they still have to be a pi apart. All right, so on the quiz and on the homework, either they'll match up, that it's already part of your scale anyway, or they'll be half increments. I won't ask you to do anything funky. Okay? I did, but in Learning Target 13, I'm going to omit some of the homework questions so you don't have to do anything funky. Questions? All right. The other part of Learning Target 13. So Learning Target 13 is to be able to graph the function, but also write a function. Okay? So again, Here is what the function should look like. Okay? Yeah? So they're going to give you all the information. It says write an equation of a sine function with the amplitude of 4, period of pi, phase shift negative pi over 8, and vertical shift 6. Okay? Right now, the amplitude and the vertical shift are the easy pieces to put in. You just write them in the equation. I know I have y equals 4 sine, some stuff happens in the parentheses, plus 6. Everyone know why the 4 and the 6 are there? Yeah. All right, now the period and the phase shift don't get stuck into the function. Some of you guys did that on the last quiz. You have to find k, you have to find c. K and c are not the period and not the phase shift. Okay? So for the period, we know that the period equals 2 pi over k. I know the period is pi. So pi equals 2 pi over k. So I need to solve for k. So what does k equal? 2. So then in my equation, I have 2 theta. Does that make sense? We did that before. We did it in the last quiz. Then we have phase shift. That's new, but we know that the phase shift equals c over k. So I know the phase shift is negative pi over 8. So negative pi over 8 equals c, because we don't know what c is, but we know k is 2, because we just found it 5 seconds ago. And so now I can cross multiply and solve for c. So I get negative 2 pi.
Can you just divide negative? So you can't just divide negative divided by 2?
No. Yes. So if we solve this, we divide by 8. And so 2 over 8 reduces down to negative pi over 4. Now, so we have to be careful. Yes, there is a minus sign already in the equation. But then you have to also include this minus sign. So I'm okay if you write it with a double negative. I'm normally not okay with that. But if it helps you to make sure you remember to do it right, then go ahead and put double negative. I don't care. But then I guess the appropriate way would put it plus pi over 4.
Oh, I didn't write it.
Questions about where the stuff on the equations came from? All right.